Greetings, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful day. And this is a time that we've set aside called The Big Idea. We're in a new sermon series called Let There Be Life, discovering the power of generous living. And throughout this series, I will record a 5-minute recap of the conversation that we just had on Sunday to kind of help us to continue to be discipled through this content, and or maybe if you didn't hear the sermon, to inspire you or motivate you to go check it out. This series is inspired by the series The Blessed Life by Pastor Robert Morris of Gateway Church, and much of its content is inspired by that content as well, as we've been looking at this concept of living a generous life. And I really want to start with a quote from Arthur Ashe. He says, "From what we get, we make a living. From what we give, however, we make a life." I'm gonna say it again. From what we get, we make a living. From what we give, however, we make a life. It is important that we understand that generous living is not just about the church, but it's about the quality of health and life across the board. Arthur Ashe and other individuals throughout history have affirmed the power of generous living, so much so that researchers and scientists found in a study that the generous life, a person who is a habitual giver or habitually generous, it has the same effect on their personal growth and happiness as found in food and sex. That's right, I literally just said that living a generous life, scientists and researchers have found, has the same effect on your personal health and happiness as food and sex. And so why is living generously so important? Because it really does give you access to a better quality of fulfillment and life. I want to look at one scripture that we've been focused on in this particular sermon, Luke chapter 6, verse 37 and 38. It says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Notice that passage did not use money specifically, but oftentimes in church we specifically use that passage to highlight money. But what it helps us to understand is that whatever you sow, you will reap. Whatever seeds you plant, you will experience the fruitfulness of. I just want to ask you a simple question today. Could it be that you are experiencing the fruitfulness of seeds you've sown? Could it be that the way you've treated people? Could it be that the way you've given judgment, the way you've given condemnation, the way you've lacked forgiveness, right? You're experiencing those things. So we understand that when we talk about giving in this passage, it's not just about money, but it also does apply to our stewardship of money, that it helps us to understand that whatever we give will come back to us, pressed down, shaken together, running over. And so it offers us this opportunity to be conscious about how we live a generous life. We also looked at one more passage as I begin to close, Deuteronomy 15, verses 7 through 11. And we saw how that passage shows us how our heart plays a part. This particular sermon in the series was called Start with the Heart. And it was challenging us to look at our heart as the source and the sustainer of living a generous life. And it showed us 4 things. That first of all, we have to deal with a selfish heart. I don't know about you, but the first lesson I had to teach my daughter and teach my son was how to share. Why? Because we're born selfish. And so God is constantly challenging us to live generously. And in a culture that constantly tells us to focus on ourselves, to live generously. The second thing, it teaches us to deal with a grieving heart. That when we give, it says we should not do so grudgingly in the NIV version. That we should not be afraid to be a giver. That we should not hold it against people or put people in a position where they feel like because we gave that we should be feeling grieved and they should be feeling guilty. But we should do so for the third reason, to develop a generous heart. That generosity and living generously will create more happiness, more healthiness, and more wholeness. And then finally, develop a grateful heart, for us to remember that we give generously because the truth of the matter is we've experienced the generosity of God in our own lives. That if we really look at our history, our resume, our background, some of us can testify to the fact that we're here only because of His grace. I hope today's recap of our sermon, Start with the Heart, a kickoff to Let There Be Life, discovering the power of generous living, was inspiring to you. And hopefully it motivates you to check this sermon out if you haven't already, and maybe to check it out again to make sure that we all leave with the power of generous living. I'll see you next week.